Well, the BART dispute is again front and center, and it again threatens the commute plans for hundreds of thousands of Bay Area residents. And joining us to talk about this, our political analyst, Michael Yaki. Yes. Michael, you're an attorney, and we were talking during the break about legally, where does this go? So fill our viewers in on what happens next.
Well, really, this is contract 101 that you learned in the first year of law school, which is both sides agree to an agreement. That's the contract. And unless there was some mutual mistake that both of them attest to, which one side clearly does not believe, the unions do not believe this was a mutual mistake, that's the way the contract is. Now, the problem here is that it is not yet been ratified by the BART board. So in some ways, it is not an executed contract. It was a contract in agreement. They have the ability, if they so want, to try and ask the other side to renegotiate on that, but you know, we'll see whether the unions really want to do that. The unions have the stronger hand in this.
Yes.
On the other hand, they do not have, and they cannot simply say we want to enforce it, because it takes two to do a contract, and the BART board still has to ratify the contract.
Okay, so let's look ahead here. It's widely assumed that the BART board is going to reject this pact.
Right.
And it's widely assumed that the unions are going to just say, well, no, we want this the way it is.
Right.
We have the rock and the hard place.
Exactly.
And so where do we go from here? Some negotiations, some sweetening of the pot by BART to say, if you'll take this off the table, we'll add something else?
Well, obviously, that's probably, in the end, what might happen, which is if they really believe this is a very big problem for the district's finances, which the union actually disputes quite vigorously, because I think the first projections they had would be if every single BART employee took 6 weeks of leave. Of course, that's never going to happen.
It's never going to happen.
The percentage is, I think, in the single digits.
Yes.
So, you know, I think part of the issue is what is the real monetary cost, and then that becomes the baseline for bargaining with the union on perhaps something else. But I think in the end, this is a debacle, I think, for BART management and the BART board. And the fact that they're blaming their temporary employee, who was their hired gun negotiator for this,
lead negotiator,
for this, I mean, who they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in hiring, I think is unconscionable. And I think it leads to a lot of questions about who's really running the store at BART. Was it this guy? Was it the general manager? And of course, you know, the basics of contract are read their copy, read your copy, make sure they both line up, and then say, okay, we're ready to go.
Well, also, too, I mean, there's the signature right there that had been signed by both parties on this tentative agreement on this specific issue. So do you think that this is going to end up in court?
I don't think it will end up in court, again, because even though they both have signatures, both of those signatures are pending ratification by their members. Just as if, I think in the AC Transit situation, you had management and the union leadership agreeing on a contract, it's still contingent on the membership ratifying it. So there's nothing really magical about the two signatures on the first document, because both are pending ratification, in one case by the unions, in the other case by the BART board. This is just going to be a case of whether or not, what kind of renegotiation goes on. Now, the union has said, we don't want to strike, this is not a strikeable issue. On the other hand, if it gets to a point where the BART board attempts to say something like, well, we are going to impose this on you, then I think all bets are off, and everyone starts going into hunker down strike mode. We're nowhere near that right now, and I think they're smart enough to understand that there's probably a way out. And if they really look at the fiscal consequence of this, I think pretty much it's not as bad as they think, especially given the fact that the operating surplus for BART is somewhere in the neighborhood of about you know, $100 million a year for the next 6 years. I think they can absorb that, so we'll see.
Yeah. A lot of people are asking, how could this happen? How is it that something like this passed through all the layers of executives and negotiators that had to look at all these documents, and they didn't see this before now?
Well, what's interesting is, of course, is if it had been a mistake in favor of management, the union had not caught it. Would the union be doing the same thing? Probably. But this is a situation where you just have to look at the contract. You have to look at all the stages. You have to look at the chronology. You have to make sure you looked at what you agreed to in July and August and anything else that's out there, made sure it's all in there, and then said, okay, we're ready to go. This is just bad oversight, bad management by the BART management, pure and simple.
Yeah, it certainly is a black eye on BART management, and so we'll see the next step this week and how all all this turns out. Michael will be back next hour to talk
Obamacare.
Obamacare, okay.
Bad kid needs to go to Obamacare.
We could have the bad kid
We could have bad kid.
appear in Washington, D.C. Maybe that's the way to do it. All right, we'll be right back.